Hey, we're live. Hi, hello, hey, hi there. So this is the PowerShell Power Hour, PS Power Hour. We're gonna do a bunch of PowerShell community lightning talks. I'm not gonna take up too much of the time. I'm guessing you're here because you want to listen to the content. So let me just introduce our first speaker today, and that is going to be Tom.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm getting the honor of starting the show this, Thursday. My name is Tommy Gilausen. I work as an IT consultant in Norway, of all places. We're already past midnight here, so I'll just keep talking and no yawning will happen for hopefully. So in my day-to-day work, and I guess in all of yours as well, we do some, at least basic troubleshooting stuff. That be looking up your IP information on your system, testing network connections, doing some resolution of DNS and stuff like that. And to do this, to achieve this, we all use a set of tools that are kind of ingrained into ourselves. PowerShell has all of these tools as commandlets as well. So I'll try to go over them and show you that there are equivalents as well. So without further ado, let's start with the first one. Now, before I go, these are only available in Windows PowerShell, and none of these have been ported to PowerShell Core yet. So with one exception, which I will talk about later. The first one is ipconfig. This is the traditional Windows tool to check your IP information on your system. This exists in PowerShell as get net IP configuration, which will display the same type of information. ipconfig has some switches, one of them being all, which will display more detailed information. In PowerShell, these are available as the getNet IP configuration I showed earlier, but also getNet adapter and getNet IP address. These three in combination will give you the same information you can get from ipconfig/all. Another ipconfig switch that all of us use pretty frequently is flush DNS, which will flush the local DNS cache and tell your DNS client to go to the internet or go to the DNS server to look up the DNS information. This commandlet is resolve DNS name. Clear DNS client cache. Clear DNS client cache. It will do the same as ipconfig/flush DNS. So moving on, we have some ICMP tests, or ping as we know them. So if you ping an address, you will get a reply, some information about your time that you've spent. This is available as a commandlet called the testnet connection. Pressing it default without any parameters in PowerShell will just use some Microsoft address, but you can also do the same with a domain name or a URL to test connection against. This will do the same as ping. It will send ICMP requests. Another ICMP tool we use a lot is traceroute, which will list the layer 3 route the packets need to take to get to the destination. This is also available through the testnet connection commandlet using the traceroute parameter. And it will give you the entire route the packets need to take. Moving on to DNS. NS lookup has been the traditional tool to use, which will resolve a DNS-A record for you. PowerShell commandlet is resolve DNS name and give you the same result in a PowerShell object way. One real advantage using resolve DNS name over NS lookup is that you can do the more advanced types of resolutions a lot easier. So here we do an SRV record lookup for zip relation TLS TCP Microsoft.com. And in NS lookup, this would entail a bit more fiddly or finicky type of parameter or a switch set after the command. Now, to test actual TCP connections to services, the traditional way in Windows at least has been to use the telnet command. From Windows 7 on, the telnet client is disabled by default in the OS. So you would have to enable it through add remove Windows functionality. In PowerShell, you can use testnet connection, which I showed earlier, to achieve the same. There are some built-in ports that you can use. So if you do test net connection, then the domain, and then HTTP in this case, it will try to connect on port 80 to the domain or to the URL you tried to connect to. But you can also use not common ports by using the dash port parameter, which will, in this case, try to connect to TCP port 5061 on zipmicrosoft.com. For layer 2 testing, the traditional way has been to use ARP-A, which will list all the layer 2 neighbors on your system. In Windows PowerShell, this is getNet neighbor, which will give you the same information. To show all the ports or all the network connections currently available on the system, the traditional tool has been to use netstat and some combination of parameters on that to display all established listening and connections on your system. PowerShell commandlet to do this is get net TCP connection. It will give you the same. Oh, that's a truth, modified truth. It will not show you the P connections the way netstat does, but it will show you the TCP connections. Now, why use PowerShell? Why learn the PowerShell commandlets instead of the traditional tools that we use? Well, the obvious one, or it's because it's PowerShell, isn't it? The way, if you use PowerShell, you will get the data returned as objects instead of when you run the tools native or the traditional tools, they will be returned as one big text string. And I have seen people write PowerShell scripts using the traditional tools and actually write text parsers to display or to get the data they want to. So, for instance, netstat, to find the NetBIOS connections on the system, you would have to pipe it into find string or something like that. That's not very precise. It will show you a lot more hits than you need. Find string can be space separated, but it will still list too much data. In PowerShell, the get net TCP connection commandlet itself uses has inbuilt filtering, but you could also, of course, use where object if you needed to. So I'm running out of time. Thanks a lot. I'll post this list to the GitHub repo. Thanks for listening, and yeah, have a nice evening.
Thank you so much. Up next, I think, is Sean. I can find him. Take it away, Sean. Looks like we're missing your audio.
Oh, sorry about that. So I'm going to walk through quick on using Docker Explorer extension. This is the extension that Microsoft published for Visual Studio Code. A lot of times when y'all see Docker used or in presentations, they're doing the command lines. And if you've ever started trying to use Docker, it can be overwhelming trying to read through all the documentation that exists for it. But instead of having to run the Docker image or Docker container, the Explorer extension gives you the ability to an extent, manage. There are some limitations to it right now that as it grows, it will probably expand. I know right off there's can't pull down an image. So if you want to go pull, say, the PowerShell core Linux image from Microsoft's repo and Docker Hub, you still have to do that using the Docker command line. But once you pull down the image, you can manage it from within the Explorer. You can right-click on almost any one of them, inspect the image, allows you to go in there and actually view it. And this is basically just issuing commands against the Docker daemon to return that information the same way you would in the command line. You can remove the image, run interactive on images that are built, because, for example, I have the PowerShell core one. If I just do a run, that will start the container, but if the image itself is not set up where it has a constant session within that image, then it'll eventually disappear just like it did there. So that basically just means that this container or this image was meant to be run interactive. So you can run interactive and then it'll sit here and pop me right into that container at the PowerShell core prompt. And then you can sit here and play as you want to with it. From one of the other hiccups that has it right now that I do have, I submitted an issue for this. Some extensions handle it well, this one doesn't, is a lot of the commands when you right click and do run, or if you right click on a container that's running and you do show logs, it'll open up terminals. Terminal management for the extension itself doesn't know how to clean itself up or to reuse. So as you use it in a single session, you will see your list and your grow for extensions. A big part of what they've included is the ability to actually create your, you can add Docker files to a workspace. I don't have a workspace open right now, so it actually errors. But what that does is lets you create, it'll automatically create the Docker file, the Docker compose file, and it creates a Docker debug file, which I can show. Let's see. This is just from the GitHub repo that it'll go through and actually prompt you for, it's mostly built around applications. So if you're doing stuff with, say, like SQL Server images or PowerShell core images, it's not built around those because you can base off the prompts that a lot of the applications that it'll prompt you for. But it's useful to see just how the syntax works. It'll build out the Docker file, throw in a couple of commands. The other things that you get with the extension in particularly is syntax highlighting. There's some IntelliSense, I believe, but I don't really mess with all that much. The main thing I've done with it is I'll add a Docker compose file to my workspace, and then I can sit and just do Docker compose up and compose down. And obviously I don't have a workspace open, but the workspace, it'll sit there and prompt you for which Docker compose file you want. So if you happen to have multiple compose files for some reason with different scenarios, it'll let you single out which one you want to as well. The registries, it does support connecting to Docker Hub and the Azure container if you have a container instance. created, which I created a container instance, but I don't have anything in it right now. But it'll let you connect to that. It'll allow you to, you can push a container or an image up to whichever registry you would like to use. I think default is set to the Docker Hub, but you can go into the extensions and switch that around. The private registries is in preview mode right now, and I don't actually use that particular setup. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's all I got.
Hey, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Next up is Francisco.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'll quickly show you how to customize a Windows desktop using Box Starter, Chocolatey, and a GitHub gist. So just a little background. Chocolatey is a package manager for Windows, just like apt-get in Ubuntu or Pacman for another Linux distro. And essentially, it's a framework that's built on top of NuGet and PowerShell. And essentially, it's a lot of intelligence layered on top of more layers of intelligence. And unfortunately, that's a talk more for the Chocolatey Fest. So, and speaking of layers, Box Starter is another one of those layers designed to work alongside with Chocolatey. It adds other features such as reboot resiliency and Windows customizations. And then the final piece is a GitHub gist, and it's essentially a sharing mechanism for individual files or code snippets on GitHub. Box Starter is going to take advantage of this GitHub gist and use it as a sort of like a manifest for things that Box Starter needs to perform and what Chocolatey may have to perform as well. And of course, you know, we've all done this, the repave process, even to our own machines. But when you have to do it at scale, or even for a small business, you don't want to be like this guy, right? Who sits there, has to go to every source for every unique piece of software, hitting the download button, and then actually launching the MSI or whatever package software is being used for that. And then, you know, the next thing you know, you got to hit next, about 5 times average per application. And obviously that's not, you know, any fun. So you can, which I've done in the past, but you know, it's all that was out there for me, especially when I didn't know, you know, what was SSCM or MDT or Puppet, Chef. I mean, who are those guys anyway, right? So now I'd like to go ahead and go through the demo on how to use these tools and get going. So first of all, Box Starter is going to need for you to set the execution policy to remote signed or, you know, something less secure, but that's how the software is going to get installed. So we're going to run that. And then this is the actual Box Starter / Chocolatey script install. So this is going to get the Box Starter modules first, which then will invoke a Chocolatey install as well. So we're going to run that, and that runs fairly quickly. And we should have our Box Starter modules set very soon. We could already see an icon showing up on the desktop, which can open up a Box Starter terminal. But we're not going to use that now. We're just going to keep going on ISE. Now we're going to go ahead and set up a set of credentials. With these credentials, what they're going to allow for Box Starter to do is to log the machine back in automatically and continue the process, continue that manifest that we're providing Box Starter. With a quick note, I found out that in Windows 10, there is a bug with auto login. So unfortunately, this may or may not work. I'll just go ahead and log in, and you'll see that the process in the background is still continuing. So let's go ahead and create those credentials, right? So Okay, the next thing is we're gonna just create a small variable for our GitHub gist, because our GitHub gist is essentially a URL and it's pretty long. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create it. And before we move on, I'd like to show you a little bit of the logic that's in this manifest or this GitHub gist, right? Here's just some description of how to get your box starter going on your machine, which is essentially what we did. But we're going to use quickly a function that is built into box starter to disable UAC. That's going to allow the rest of the installations to run smoothly, right, during their installation process. We're also just going to quickly install a tool that I like to use, which is Ditto, so we can get an application installed. We're also going to tell Chocolatey to perform the installation of the Microsoft Hyper-V Windows feature and also turn on the containers feature. And then we're going to do other things like install Docker for Windows, again, all from the Chocolatey repo. And we're going to install Posh Docker, which is a PowerShell module, but we can also have that be pulled in, again, invoking PowerShell at that point. Then we're also going to install Git and a few parameters for that. And we're going to do a little bit of cleanup. Our Windows box is, again, brand spanking new. There's nothing on it. There's a bunch of additional Microsoft software, right, that comes bundled in. We're going to get rid of all that. So that's what this logic is here. And then at the very end, we're just going to go ahead and enable UAC again. And the process, you'll see, will stop at that point. So let's get going, because I know time is of the essence. Let's go ahead and run the following. We're gonna run install box starter package, which is a commandlet built into the box starter module. We're going to provide a package, which is the manifest that we just created into a variable of Docker setup. And then we're going to provide those credentials. Again, may or may not work. This is unfortunately a bug within Windows 10. So let's get to it. So as you can see, it actually created, well, it's going to do a reboot already. So it's already working in the background, trying to install some of the Windows features. And if it doesn't
Did we lose you?
see reboot.
Oh, can you
Nope.
back up
I
about
think we
5
had
seconds?
Yeah, you probably got to back up a little, and you got about 2 minutes left.
Me?
Not sure if it's your bandwidth, but you're kind of fading in and out.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right, we're almost in here. Okay. Still got some work to do here, but again, it's going to go through the manifest. And let me bump up the font. I'm not sure if that was an issue earlier. This is another cool thing, right? It's downloading the Docker for Windows. It's going to install it and so forth. And then again, remove all that other additional software that's here. I like for you guys to see that, but if time is of the essence,
30 seconds left.
Okay, so then let's move on to just the. I have some resources here that I'd like to share. I'll probably post them up. And then, again, my name is Francisco Navarro, Enterprise Consultant. I'm a contributor to TechSnips. You can find me on Twitter and that's like ID. I'm also the co-organizer for Chicago PowerShell User Group. So that is all I got. But if we have a few more seconds, let me go back and see how the machine is doing.
That is time. We're good.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Next up, Brandon.
Okay, you see my screen?
Yep, you're good to go.
All right, awesome. So my name is Brandon Olin, and this demo is about the operation validation framework and how to use this framework to test your infrastructure with Pester. A little bit about me. I'm a cloud architect. I do a lot of stuff with PowerShell, and I have a lot of interesting projects on GitHub if you want to check them out. And what I want to talk about today, like I said, is the operation validation framework. And this is a PowerShell module originally created by Microsoft, and I've since taken over maintainer duties of it. Essentially what this does is it's a framework for packaging Pester tests inside PowerShell modules and then being able to execute them. And it's a really nice framework for if you want to start looking at Pester to not test your code and the inputs and outputs of your functions and mocking and so forth, but actually using Pester to test your actual infrastructure. Like, is a service up? Does a report respond? Do I have enough disk space? And so forth. Or really using Pester to actually test the health and operation of your applications. And the OVF framework, by virtue of putting these Pester tests inside PowerShell modules, is that they're discoverable, they're publishable on the PowerShell gallery. You can version them and execute separate versions of your tests and so forth, and everything else that comes with putting PowerShell code inside modules. The OVF framework is very simple in that it has two commands: get operation validation and invoke operation validation, and they do what they say. Get operation validation will inspect your PS module path and look at all your modules, and will look for Pester tests inside a defined folder structure in that module, and will return you those test results back. And you can also filter this based on a module name or a version or a particular test type or a Pester tag. I'll go over test types in just a second. But once you have that collection of tests, you can then invoke them with invoke operation validation. And under the covers, what this eventually is doing is just running invoke Pester. But it's a nice way to be able to package up your tests and discover them as modules. Invoke operation validation can also take that collection of tests and execute either all of them, or based on a particular Pester tag, you can optionally include the default Pester output. And an interesting feature as well is that not everyone is aware of with Pester is that you can override parameters that are given to your Pester tests. And this is a nice way to create more generic Pester tests that you can then override with certain parameters for different use cases. So if I had a generic test to test that a website is up, I can override that URL as appropriate. This is the structure of a PowerShell module that would include these OVF tests. Like you can see, there's your normal PSD1 file and PSM1. But what the operation validation framework, what it looks for is looks for a diagnostics folder at the root of your module, and inside there, it'll look for a comprehensive folder and a simple folder, and inside those folders is where you have your traditional Pester tests. And this would be, you know, like I said, either tests that will test services or memory or disk or any kind of test that would gauge the health of your application. And the difference between comprehensive and simple is, I like to think of it as more about speed and what's the complexity of the test. So a simple test will test a very simple thing, very quick to execute. You can think of like simple smoke tests to test, hey, is this service up? Does this port respond? Comprehensive tests are tests designed to test a much longer length scenario to test the health of your application. And generally these could be kind of more computationally expensive tests. So you may not want to be able to run these tests every 5 minutes like you could with a simple test, for instance. Maybe a comprehensive test runs once an hour or once a day or something like that. And that's it for the slides. And let me show you what this looks like in a demo. Let's go ahead and I already have the operation validation module installed, but let's go ahead and import it now. And I'm going to add my current folder onto my PS module path, because you can see I have this PowerShell module called MyApp OVF, and our traditional PSD1 and PSM1, and I have this special diagnostics folder with my simple and comprehensive folders underneath, and I have pester tests inside those. So if I just run get operation validation without any parameters, it's going to by default inspect every module that I have installed on the machine that's in my PS module path and look for modules that conform to this structure and have pester tests inside these subfolders. And it'll return a list of all of them that it finds. And you can see I have some installed under program files and other ones in my user directory here. And this will include either the version of the module, the file that the pester test was found in, and this is actually the name of the describe block of the pester test. So let's go ahead and run get operation validation and scope this just to this module, which I've added to my module path. And we can look at this one, and it has a couple tests in here, which you can see app test, memory tests, and services. And you can see OS critical services. If we look at this, you can see my describe block, and that's what it's called. And I've also tagged it with critical and important for this. And what this test is doing is I've kind of broken out some common Windows services into what would be, you may deem critical services to the health of the server versus important ones, or maybe if you kind of look at it from an application perspective, you know, these services, if they're not running, the app is down. If these services aren't running, the app is degraded or something like that. And then this, what these tests are doing is just running get service against that particular service and saying it should be running. So this is a traditional, you know, a pretty vanilla pester test, but instead of testing our code,
about 2 minutes.
Okay, it's testing the health of a service. So let's go ahead and run get the critical tests, and we'll also run or get a collection of important tests, and let's actually invoke them. So you can see here, this is running the actual pester tests, and I can also see the output of that. And run important tests, and you can see that one of them is failing. And I also have the output of that. I can also get a test based on tag, run that test, and also if I would like to override that test, I can do that. And if we look at this memory test, I have this parameter here saying that my free memory threshold is 500. And if I run it without overriding, that will pass. But if I then override it and say, you know what, my threshold for free memory is actually 10,000, you can see that it will fail. And this is just another instance of doing this with the app test, where I can test a website. I can pass in PowerShell Gallery, or I can pass in Microsoft.com. So that's all I have for the demo. back to this real quick. Here is some other related OVF projects that I've created called Watchman and PS Health Z, if you want to check those out later. And here is some
About 30
articles
seconds.
that other people have written in the community about infrastructure testing in general, which I'd encourage you to check out if you have time. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, I also have audio on my end, so I don't know if anybody can hear me. I'll go ahead and let you all know that next up is Steven, and I'll switch over to him now. Hopefully everybody else can hear.
Hey guys. All right, we're going to talk about toast notifications in Windows 10 a little bit more in depth. Josh has covered this already previously, but I wanted to show off a little bit more about what it can do and give you some ideas for using toast notifications in your infrastructure. It's pretty cool. Once I discovered this module, I decided that, I don't use toasts enough. They're really quite handy when used effectively. So just to review real quick, to get the module, here's his GitHub URL here. You can clone it with Git or install it via PowerShell with the install module commandlet. One fun thing that you can do with Toast once you have it installed that I find interesting is give yourself reminders. Instead of using, say Outlook calendars or something else, you can just schedule a reminder sometime into the future to let you know that something's done or that you need to go do something. I like to remind myself when the coffee's ready, things like that. So if we just step through this code, I've got a couple of parameters created here. I give it a title, some text, and then how long into the future I want to schedule the toast to happen, whether that be 30 seconds from now, a couple minutes, or hours. And then I use jobs so as not to interrupt anything else that I'm doing inside of the console. I make sure to transpose the seconds, and I'm using a stopwatch, a .NET stopwatch, to count down the seconds that I've specified. And then I will actually toast. So we'll go ahead and run this, and I'll just make it rather short. That do reminder. We'll schedule it for, say, 5 seconds into the future. Let me get this out of the way a little bit. And there's my toast notification. Once the stopwatch reached 5 seconds, it toasted me that it was done. You can also do toast notifications on engine events. I discovered this commandlet a little while ago. You can only do things with engine events that are on idle or exiting for PowerShell. So I thought it would be really cool if I have automation code running somewhere on a server and I wanted a toast notification when that automation code was done running. I can use register engine event to send me a toast whenever PowerShell exits. So if I've got like a scheduled task or something that runs, at the end of it, I'll get a toast notification when it's done. We can go ahead and run this here. And if I just exit PowerShell again, I forgot to grab that import. There's a scope issue with the engine event things. if you have the module already imported into your session, the engine event doesn't see it. So you have to re-import that module for the import to, or for the toast notification to work. I haven't discovered a way to make it not possible to do that import. I believe it is something tied with the scope of PowerShell at that exiting state. It probably is dumping its modules at that point, and I have to make it a point to re-import it or something. But that's a really cool trick for getting toast notifications during exit for any automation that you want to run. Another cool thing that I've started to play with here is toast notifications when, say, a service flaps or something like that in our monitoring infrastructure. I'm going to use just the demo site for Grafana to show this off. So we're not touching any production environments or anything like that here. But if we run this code, we'll actually get a toast notification that includes a button. And if I click on that button, and I'll drag this over here for y'all to see, it actually takes me directly to, I just picked this CPU usage frame from the Grafana demo. But you could specify a service or a table or whatever's causing the issue in your monitoring. You can link directly to that and use a button to quickly get to that information via a toast notification. Toasts right now are limited to things like opening files and URLs. There's some more work that can probably be done to make it actually run code. But there's some issues with, again, scope to make that happen. So it'll be a little bit of work, but at some point I would like to see the ability to, you know, if a service goes bad or something and you get a toast notification and you've got a button, you can just click that button and it'll fire off the code to do other things, fix that service, you know, generate some more logging for whatever's going on, or, you know, the sky's the limit there. And then the last thing I wanted to show off was what I'm doing here with checking for toner levels in our printers. I've got a test printer set up here, and this is some older code, but it should be pretty self-explanatory as we step down through it here as to how I'm using toast notification to let us know when a printer on campus here reaches, say, we use 5% as our threshold for changing those out. I've got a couple of parameters that I read in. The printers is a CSV file that I have created that's got all of our printers with IP addresses, names, SNMP strings. There's some SNMP OID information in there. It's all documented in that CSV file, so it's a one-stop shop to get everything I need. I am relying on snmpget.exe to make this work. You can use the oleprn.ole snmp class
About 2 minutes left.
to query your information. But things like MAC addresses and anything that's based on that style of output, it kind of gets mangled with using that OLE SNMP thing. So the SNMP get is a bit friendlier. It returns everything as a string, so I'm able to capture it a little bit easier and make things readable for me. These are all the OIDs for Xerox. This is based on the SNMP standard. So these should work for pretty much everything. There might be a couple of different devices out there that the SNMP strings will be different, but I found that the Xerox ones do work on a couple of other models. Then I just read in my CSV file. I do a quick test. This is an old development file, so there's a couple of lines in here that shouldn't be, but here I'm reading in all those SNMP values. I need to get the full value and the current value, and then do some math on them to get their percentage.
About the 30-second mark.
Okay. I trim out all of the data I don't need, so I get just the numbers. I store all of those numbers as objects. And then for every computer that I want to toast notify, I loop through and run an invoke command against it. And then it will toast that there's a low toner alert. And if we run this guy.
And that's time.
There you go. I just got toasted. I have 1% left in this demo. All right. Thanks, guys. I hope that inspires you to use toast in a more creative way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. Up next, Joshua.
All right. Thank you. So I'm talking about the ISO 8601 standard, which is a universal datetime standard, which is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So before we dive in, I wanted to quickly show off some date formats from around the world. And a little disclaimer before I start going through them. These are based on a list from Wikipedia, so if they're not 100% accurate, blame the wiki and not me. And the link to that list is down the bottom right of these slides. So, America has the month first, then the date, then the year. Number of other countries around the world, including New Zealand, where I'm from, and the UK, have the date first. Ooh. I don't think they can see my screen, Michael. Ooh. There we go. Anyway, you haven't missed anything, just the title screen. Then a few other countries around the world are using, officially, as far as I'm aware, the ISO standard, or something very akin to it, where they've got the year, then the month, then the date, the day. So really the odd one out there is America, and anyone that's using the same sort of system. All right. So that causes a little bit of confusion, especially for me. So that date there for America, 9/12/2018, looks like the 9th of December. So when I'm looking at dates, I need to apply some context. Then there's other countries like Canada, which I couldn't quite figure out. Officially, the government recommends the ISO standard, but they seem to be in a bit of a tug of war between America and England, and yeah. So what is the ISO 8601 standard? It'll look something like this, and to quickly run through it, we've got the year, then the month, then the day, and then on the right-hand side of that T, we've got time. So hour, minutes, seconds. Going on to the right, you can also include milliseconds and a time zone offset. So if you don't include a time zone offset, it's going to assume local time. If you include a Z, that indicates it's UTC. And you can put a plus or minus in there. So for me, at the moment, it would be +13. So what's the problem that the ISO standard's trying to resolve? It's mainly ambiguity. So it was, for example, that, yeah, I'm using 8601 without UTC a little bit loosely there. But ambiguity, if you're using 8601, you always know exactly the date that's being referred to, rather than having to apply context or figuring out where the other person's from to figure out what date they're actually referring to. And for me, one of the big issues I've found is, and with no offense meant, of course, is Americans writing code for Americans and then non-Americans trying to run it and it not working. And a big thing where this comes out is both storing dates on disk and transferring dates between systems. So an example from the wild that I've come across is the My Tasks module from Jeff Hicks. This has been fixed. So yeah, I don't feel too bad about picking on it. But as you can see I hope you can see in that error, it's written to disk a date in my local time zone, and that string can't actually be converted back to a date time object. So when you try and retrieve your tasks from disk, you get that lovely error. So this is the code as it was in that module when that error was captured. That new XML variable ends up getting written to disk, and that's what's read back in later. And there's a number of different dates within that XML. So we've got the due date for the date, task created, task modified. For me, that's going to output in my local time format, so day, month, year, which unfortunately that can't be converted back into a date time object. So the fix was to convert those dates to a different format using a lowercase s, with that lowercase s meaning sortable, and it's a ISO 8601 compliant format at any rate. So that outputs year dash month dash date, and that can be converted back to a date time object. So that's what was changed in the MyTask module, and now it works for me and some other people around the world that have tried it. But if you use getDate with that format lowercase s, you're going to realize that you don't actually have a date time object anymore, because what you've actually created is a string. Whereas if you just run getDate without a format, you're going to get a date time object. So if you've got a date time object, you don't need to run it back through getDate with the format parameter. Just run toString and pass in the lowercase s, and you're going to end up with your properly formatted time. And interestingly enough, for anyone that cares, it is actually the 14th down here. I was off by about 5 minutes when I was guessing the time. So, takeaways from this, and an important caveat. If you're writing dates to disk, use ISO 8601. There is other formats you can use other than the lowercase s, which will do the same job and are probably better to use. I can see in chat lowercase o. That might be the one that converts to UTC. I'm not entirely sure, but there's a whole list of them in the documentation. If you're passing dates between systems, use 8601. But if you're dealing with humans, you can't assume all humans know the 8601 standard. So in order to eliminate the problem of ambiguity with humans, just give them 3 letters for the date, or spell out the date, or the month. Then it doesn't matter which order you put it in, they're going to understand what it is. And if you've written some code and you're not sure that it's going to work outside of your country, I'm happy to crash test it for you. If I've got time, I might even offer to help edit it.
About 2 minutes?
And that's good timing. So this slide deck's available at that bit.ly link. You can hit me up on Twitter at WindowsNZ, and I'll be chucking this slide deck up in the PS PowerHour repo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now another Josh.
All right. So my name is Josh Rickard. I have been in IT for a few years now. I am basically, I had a background in system administration and went into digital forensics and like Windows security as my role. And part of that was PowerShell automation. Now, though, I actually, I'm a product owner for CoFence. It used to be FishMe. So that's a little bit about myself. And that is actually me underneath that mask. So today I'm actually going to talk about PS logging. It's a PowerShell logging module that uses PowerShell 5 classes. Really, I was supposed to actually present this at the DevOps Summit last year. I ended up getting extremely sick twice within 3 weeks. And so my doctor said, do not fly or you're going to endanger a bunch of people. So, but I'm okay now, and this will just be kind of a quick run through. One of the big things about this repo, it's under MS Administrator, not Miss as in Mrs. It is Microsoft Administrator. But basically, this logging class will log to either a file, the console, and the Windows Event Viewer. And there's a lot of documentation thanks to Matt. He helped me kind of point me in the right direction, but I was able to come up with some of this documentation and generate it going forward. So let's get into the nitty gritty now, then. So hopefully the size and the font is okay. Part of this module, what we'll first do is actually go in and import it, just like we do every other module. And so we'll actually take that and we'll go ahead and import. Everything is okay. I have this force here mostly because, you know, I've been playing with it. First thing that we can actually look at is the exported functions. Right now, there's only these public functions that are exported, and these are really just wrappers around the class. We'll talk about these a little bit, but we'll actually import this class manually instead of actually using these functions. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual class now. Well, classes. All right. So I have a couple of enums here, and if you're not familiar with enums, they're just basically validation sets that you'll use. There's probably a proper term, but there's there's actually 4 classes. There's 1 class, and then 3 base classes that are derived from the log class. And this log class is really all about, its job is just to print and format data. When Joshua was talking about date time formats, I am using the -O, and so we'll take a look at take a look at it here. But we have different logging levels. We have, you know, the info log, a success, a warning, debug, error, and then also error including error records. So you can actually pass in the error record, and we'll actually do some formatting and provide a little bit more useful output. Additionally, there's another method basically that is for a mutex. It's basically creating that mutex, and then we'll actually dissolve it a little bit later in each individual subclass or derived classes. So like I said, we'll talk about each one of these. With the event viewer, we have a log file class as well as a write host class. So event viewer has 2 overloads. If you've ever been in C# or basically you have an overload method where you can take different input for the same named method. So the first one, we actually just need to pass in a log name and a log source. We set our class instances variables to whatever is passed in. I could do probably a little validation if we wanted to, but I expect that the user is going to be providing the correct string. We have some verbose logging. One thing that I do by default is actually set the entry type and the event ID to the information type event log, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. I do this just because of a standard. You can modify that at any point, but yeah, this is just kind of the base. We first determine, does a log exist? If it does, then, or if it doesn't, then we'll actually go ahead and create it. If it does, we just prop out a little warning and let you continue on the way. We do have the overload. Again, you can actually pass in a remote or an array of computers. And we'll actually, it's assumed that you already have a connection, or you can connect with your current credentials. If not, it will definitely ask. And yeah, that's it. So it's same kind of logic. We do have what this method of getters and setters. We have get and set for each log name, source, so on and so forth. Oh, this is taking a lot more time. It's not going as fast as I thought. So info, we have overload methods as well for each info, success, warning, debug, and errors. And we actually call a private or a hidden method that is basically taking whatever string message or whatever we want to actually parse, creating it and writing it to the event log. So they're all derived, again, from that log. For this example, for error, and you have a message and you pass in an error record, we'll actually ensure that our entry type and event ID is error, and we'll take the passed in message and use the base class of log for this and pass it into the error method. And we actually combine that string and then say, okay, this I want to write out to the event log. And that's where we call our hidden method here. Going on to the log file, it's similar setup. You have to actually pass it a path. We'll go ahead and create it if it doesn't exist. And we have well, right now we actually just have, info, success, warning, debug, error. And this is where we actually create and add our content based on our mutex. When we call that base class, we'll actually go in and add the content, and we'll actually release it once we're done. All right, so we can also write host. Write host, you have some default coloring that I've added here. Probably not the proper way, but you can set and get the color at any point. And we can set it for each log type. So error log, success, warning, so on and so forth. So let's actually look at some code here. So when we're wanting to actually create an event log for the event viewer, we'll just actually call the event viewer class after it's loaded, new the method, and provide a log name and a log source. That'll is that really going to do that right now? Yeah, that's what you get for doing it live.
About 2-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. What the heck? I imported this, right? All right, sorry guys, I'm going to do this old school just to get this going. All right, so we go ahead and we create it. Got to figure out what that is. Here are some examples of info, debug, and success. You just call that object that we created. We do info, debug, and then just pass in whatever we want. Here is a fake error that we'll show you. So if we go back, we go over to our event viewer. I'll do a refresh real quick. You'll see that. Can't do this on me. Well, maybe we'll check on that in a little bit. Let's go on to the log. I don't know what's going on there. All right, so we will actually go ahead to the log file. We actually pass it in a path. It'll go ahead and create that log file. And we'll do the same thing for this actual log. So once I have that, I can actually just go ahead and open that file. And you'll see inside of this file, we actually have
30-second mark.
each individual log based on info, timestamp, and we actually have a formatted error string. Let's go ahead and we'll create the right host logging, and we'll just log this out. And you can, again, change these colors anytime you want to whatever you want. But let's actually combine all of these, and this is kind of a proper example before the time ends here, is the get PS PowerHour. We pass in the error record, error message, and then pass it into each one of those individual logs. And so it'll actually print it out on screen. It's written it to the file. I was going to actually.
That's about time.
All right, cool. Thank you very much. Sorry for the issues, but thank you, Matt. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Up next, we've got Mike Shepard.
All right. Excellent. So I am going to be demoing what I call WPF Bot 3000. What it is a DSL for a subset of WPF. Why I wrote a DSL for a subset of WPF is I do a lot of training with engineers that really have done very little coding, and so when I tell them that doing DSLs in PowerShell is fairly easy, they look at me funny. So I thought, well, what would be a good DSL to write? So maybe 2.5 years ago, I actually made a proof of concept of this project, but didn't really ever go anywhere with it. And I realized as I was doing training that I would tell people, oh, you should really only do GUIs in PowerShell for things that are fairly easy. And the more I thought about it, even simple GUIs in PowerShell were more difficult than I wanted them to be. So I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about, and then I'll do the proper demo of WPF Bot 3000. So one of the first ways that you'll hear people talking about building GUIs in PowerShell is using a WinForms generator, something like poshgui.com, which is a really, really nice tool. I'm not saying anything bad about it. If I'm building a WinForms thing, I would probably use something like this. If you've got PowerShell Studio, you've got the same kind of thing there. PowerShell Pro Tools for Visual Studio has a nice GUI builder as well. So those are really nice tools. But this is a fairly simple window. I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. But you see there's a lot of code. Certainly not something you would want to run by hand. If I run that, I'll pull that over to the screen so you can see it. You've got a text box with a label and a button, and if I type my name there, I can personalize the greeting. So obviously not intended to be a production kind of example, but to give you the idea of we've got a variety of controls. We've got controls that are interacting, getting and setting properties of controls in response to events. So again, not a very convincing example, but we've got almost 60 lines of code, and it's commented code, but still that gives you an idea. And then after you look at WinForms, you go to something like WPF, and the prevailing wisdom there is that you use a XAML editor like in Visual Studio, maybe Visual Studio Community, and then you take the XAML and you embed it in a PowerShell script. So I've done that here. And again, this is still a good technique. Still have quite a bit of code. And then you use the WPF classes to grab controls out of there and add event handlers. And if I run this, it works. After watching Josh have problems with demos, I'm really nervous. Doesn't look quite the same, but that's not the point. The point is I'm still doing the same kind of thing. And I've still got quite a bit of code. So I thought, you know, what should this look like? And here is what it looks like if you implement this with WPF Bot. So I have a window with a text box called name. I've got a button that is labeled personalized that has an action on it that's referring to this label down here that's named greeting. and here's the action that's going to happen when you run the button. And when I run this, assuming it runs, it does. Again, it doesn't look the same, but the functionality is the same. And there's not a whole lot of work that went into the script. I would write this by hand. There's no way I would write the XAML or the WinForms thing by hand. I wouldn't even consider doing that. And also, you've got hooks in here to make it look however you want. I just am usually more concerned about getting something that works before I try to get something that looks nice. And most of the time, I just leave off and don't bother making it look nice, to be honest. So that's one of the design goals for the project, was to make something that's very, very easy to use. I wanted to make it so that you could do WPF without knowing, without needing to use any XAML, because XAML is a little bit intimidating, especially for, as I mentioned, you got administrators that don't come from a coding background, and you say, oh, here, just write this XAML, and they're deer in the headlights. And then the third thing, I wanted the code in the module to be fairly straightforward. So in this example, for instance, this text box is just a function, and it returns a text box. So if I type text box name down here, right, it actually outputs a WPF text box object. So there's nothing up my sleeves. The routines, the functions for the different controls are fairly straightforward. So let me show you some examples that are a little more interesting. So one of the things I talk about is that you should be able to do data entry fairly easily. So here, instead of using the window as the top level function, I use dialog, which is really geared towards doing data entry. It labels controls and gives you an OK and cancel button. So if I run that, pull this over so you can see it, that actually looks halfway usable already. And there's no code involved to make it look pretty. This is just out of the box. And if I fill it in, if I didn't put Social Security number in here, we'll just say that's my birth date, which isn't right. We'll look at the output. It actually outputs an object, and the properties of the objects are the values of the named controls, and the property names are the names of the controls. So that's pretty much drop dead simple. And if we look at the controls in the module, you can see quite a bit of the border, button, calendar, checkbox, combo box, list view, grid view, whatever. Most of the controls you probably want are in here. And there is a way to use controls that aren't part of the module as well, if you want to. I don't have time to demo that today, but it's pretty much one line of code where you say, this is the name of the class, this is the function name I want to give it, and you register it through one of 4 different classes depending on the behavior you want. So here's another example that's a little more involved. Here again, we have a window because we're not doing data entry. Got a dock panel with a menu, so some menu items inside there, a status bar, some things that are docked. Right, this is really just a demo of showing you using a dock panel. But you can see I've got a drop-down menu with items in and a separator. I've got
the 2-minute mark.
All right. What other example? I've got a grid example. That's not super interesting. But again, you can see it's just flowing, and you can see I'm programmatically generating the labels here. So that's kind of fun. And then the last example that I have is a more involved example. And the idea is that I have an image control, and I'm going to cycle through the images that are in a folder. And I'm just using my pictures folder. Fortunately, I don't have anything objectionable in my pictures folder. I've got buttons down at the bottom, and I can scroll through them, and it's outputting the name. But you can see this. There's not a whole lot in the actual window, right? I've got a stack panel, an image, a couple of buttons. That's really all there is to it. So highly recommend you look at it if you're doing any kind of GUI thing. One fun thing about it is that I don't know WPF very well. So there's some things I haven't included just because I don't know how to do them in WPF. If you look at the repo and find something that you think would be awesome to add to it, add an issue, hit me up on Twitter or email, or on email that works, or whatever.
30 second mark.
I'll see what I can do. That's what I've got. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. That is a wrap for tonight. That's everybody that we had scheduled. We're looking forward to the next PS Power Hour. Warren, do you have the date for that? Is that next week?
It is the 19th. I don't know what day that is.
I think that's Tuesday, right? Wednesday. That'll be next Wednesday. So yeah, we'll be back next Wednesday for another hour of PowerShell. So until then, everybody have a good day, good week, and we'll see you soon.